Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and I bid you a very warm welcome to this special working session on adaptive social protection. Before we begin the formal proceedings, I would like to ask you to join me. Join me in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Turrbal, the Jagera, and the Ugara peoples, and also join me in paying respect to their elders, past and present. I welcome our audience here today in Brisbane in the room, but I also welcome the hundreds of people that have dialed in online today. Our audience comprises policymakers, practitioners, experts, academics, those who understand both social protection and, of course, disaster risk reduction. I really feel honored and humbled today to be in the presence of so many people who are devoting their lives to helping others, helping the vulnerable groups across our region. Members of the audience, whether you're here or online, you can interact with this session through the mobile conference app, and it's through that portal that you can ask questions to the panel. If you're in the room today and wish to come down to the mic, it's over there when we get to the Q&A session for panelists, but otherwise do feel free to use the app to channel your questions. Our panelists are among the leading lights in social protection in the Asia-Pacific region. Today they are going to bring us inspiring examples of how adaptive social protection systems can work and what they can do. Ms. Rodora Alday is Director of the Policy Development and Planning Bureau of the Philippines Department of Social Welfare and Development, the famous DSWD. In the span of 19 years with the department, Rodora has accrued extensive experience in development policy and programming, particularly, though, in the areas of social protection and social welfare. Rodora is the lead technical support to the Philippines Subcommittee on Social Protection and has direct experience in implementing social welfare and social protection projects and development reform projects. At the far end, Mr. Maliki has been working in Indonesia's Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas, for 22 years. Since 2019, Pak Maliki has served as the Director for Poverty Alleviation and Community Empowerment, leading policy planning for inclusive social protection and social empowerment models. Currently, he is in charge of putting together a roadmap for the reform of Indonesia's social protection system, and specifically, he is working on a national adaptive social protection program and developing a socio-economic registry which will cover the entire population of Indonesia. And in the middle, Mr. Shailendra Prasad is Head of E-commerce, Digital Finance Services, and Corporate Affairs at Vodafone Fiji. As head of the FinTech Solutions team, Shailendra was instrumental in the launch of the first and most successful mobile wallet service called M-Pesa. M-Pesa enables local digital payments to and from businesses and government, but also it enables the receipt of international money transfers to mobile phones. Shailendra appears regularly as a panelist in many international fintech conferences, bringing the Fiji example about which he will speak today to the world. Shailendra also spearheaded the launch of Vodafone's and Fiji's first e-commerce trading platform known as Vitikat. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to set the scene for us today in this working session by showing a brief video clip.
අනිත් එක ආහාර හිඟයි. බඩු නැහැ, ගණ්ඩ, මිලයි හැමදේම දෙගුණ තෙගුණ වෙලා බඩු වල මිල කරන්න පුළුවන් උපරිම අඩු කරලා තියෙන්නේ. කිරිපිටි එක එහෙමම අපි නතර කරලා තියෙන්නේ දැන්.
Social protection is undoubtedly one of the best weapons we have in the fight against poverty and hunger. Adaptive social protection recognizes that the real power comes from building the resilience of households and communities so that they weather better the economic shocks and the natural hazards which befall them. Put simply, adaptive social protection, if we get it right, prevents a shock from becoming a crisis. In the last 2 years, during an almost unprecedented economic crisis provoked by the COVID pandemic, social protection systems were the first line of defense. Governments across the Asia-Pacific region stepped up admirably. Social protection saved lives and saved the livelihoods of millions of people. But the COVID pandemic did one more thing, I think. For me, at least, it has made the case for adaptive social protection stronger than it has ever been. And it's done so by showing us two things. The first is that the populations that fared the best during the pandemic were those who were receiving regular, predictable transfers long before the pandemic hit. They fared better because they were more resilient, and the resilience helped them to weather the shock of the lockdowns. The other thing is, when those lockdowns ended, those were the people who recovered more quickly than others because they had transfers regularly going on for years before the crisis hit. Secondly, the countries that fared the best during the pandemic were those who had existing protocols and procedures in place to expand their social protection programs as the economic crisis deepened and more people needed help. So the countries that prepared better fared better. So this tells us, COVID has taught us, that we need to use social protection to build resilience to shocks, to help people weather the storm. We need to use social protection during crises as a first response. And it's taught us that getting prepared today for tomorrow's shocks is a really good thing to do. And one of the countries, I think, that's done this the best over the years is the Philippines. And Rodora, let me turn to you. You've got a great example in the Philippines of how you use social protection in these two ways. One, to bring people out of poverty over a long time, and two, to respond to shocks. Can you tell us how your country and you, with your role, dealt with the COVID pandemic and what lessons you and your government are taking away from the last 2 years?
Even prior to the pandemic, the Philippines has existing social protection program infrastructure that were used to address economic shocks and mitigate the impacts of disaster. The first instance was Typhoon Haiyan hit in 2013. Various humanitarian organizations actually provided cash grants through top-up grants to our 3.8 million CCT beneficiaries then. On the other hand, our registration of poor households from the National Household Targeting System were used also by the humanitarian organizations for cash for work and cash transfers programming. The second instance was when we implemented a 3-year unconditional cash transfer. Unconditional cash transfer to address the shocks or the negative impacts of various tax reform programs initiated by the government. So we have targeted to cover 10 million households at the time. And from the 10 million, we already, the CCT beneficiaries, which were about already 4.2 million, and about more than 2 million social pensioners, older persons, automatically received top-up grants as part of the unconditional cash transfer program. And the rest were drawn from the 2015 database of poor households. However, we were not able to reach the target because we have to implement validation procedures because the additional beneficiaries were from the 2015 database. So it's most of the data should be, most of the beneficiaries should be validated because we've been receiving a lot of grievances, and then we have to establish their identity so we can enroll them for a bank account. So we can, because the transfer should be, we are mandated to do the transfers through banks. And of course, COVID-19 pandemic happened. The government actually mandated a law establishing what we call the Social Amelioration Program. We had a very ambitious target. We are mandated to distribute cash grants to 18 million low-income and vulnerable households and sectors, to include persons with disabilities, pregnant and lactating women, overseas returning Filipinos who were jobless, those who lost their jobs, farmers and fisher folks. So it's actually expanded the cash transfer program of the Philippines to cover those who needed the assistance the most, more than the CCT beneficiaries. And because of the eligibility prescribed by the law, there were no single database. That was the biggest challenge that we had. There were no single database to address the eligibility criteria. So what we did then was we have to work with our local government units to assist us in the identification of eligible beneficiaries and then it was submitted to us for further validation and then for registration and enrollment to the program. The 2015 database of poor households were only used for programming purposes. So I think the lesson learned there is that it's fortunate that the Philippines have established fundamental processes to expand existing social protections to cover more beneficiaries who needed transfers the most. So I'll stop there for now, John.
Thanks, Rodora. I'm struck both by the absolute magnitude of what you were dealing with. The number of households is really overwhelming. But also thanks for your candor about the challenges of expanding during crises. People's socioeconomic status drops overnight, and so your existing social registry doesn't always or doesn't often fit the bill. And so your challenge is to identify new beneficiaries, validate them, are really challenges faced by all countries. And I think some of the protocols you have in place will be excellent for other countries to look at. So Rodora, thank you very much. One of the other perennial challenges, of course, is ensuring easy, safe and secure access of recipients to their transfers, to their entitlements. During the COVID pandemic, Shailendra, Fiji and Vodafone in particular partnered and did some phenomenal work on access. Can you briefly talk us through how you harness digital financial services to expand access and allow people to receive their entitlements?
Thank you, John. One of the things that I wanted to highlight at the outset is Fiji is a home to 300 plus islands, of which about 100 are inhabited The population is very geographically dispersed. And if you look at it in the context of economies of scale, taking services to a lot of the people in the traditional mode of bricks and mortar is not economically viable. And Fiji, in terms of mobile penetration, the population coverage of the network is around 96%. We have data priced amongst the lowest in the world. In fact, a recent survey by cable.co highlighted that Fiji was placed the lowest in terms of per GB data cost in the Oceania region and the 4th lowest in the world. So from a access and connectivity point of view, the infrastructure is there for us to take services to people more cost effectively. And as part of the mobile network connectivity, SIM registration requires people to do certain level of KYC. And what that meant was, it sort of met the requirement for low-risk accounts to be opened as mobile wallets. So as you know, in 2007, Kenya launched what became worldwide known as M-Pesa, a mobile wallet that is most quoted around the world. And the company that launched it was Safaricom. It's a partner operating company of Vodafone. So Vodafone Fiji at the time owned 49% by UK, basically asked if we could have that platform. And it was meant to cost a lot. So our own in-house team developed a solution almost the same as the replica of the M-Pesa platform. And a lot of the things had to come in place: private-public partnership, some funding assistance from CDF as seed fund, and of course, the regulatory authority having the leeway to allow for this kind of innovation to take place. And the rest is history. If I can put some stats on the table, we currently have over 550,000 people registered for M-Pesa mobile wallet out of a population of 900,000. There are over 350,000 people that actively use. This year, we are expected to transact over $2 billion worth in transaction. And during the COVID pandemic, when the whole economy was almost in a lockdown mode, and as you know, Fiji is highly dependent on the tourism sector, and that industry almost was ground to a halt with zero foreign exchange. What the government did, obviously, they used the M-Pesa mobile wallet channel to allow for people to be able to register for government assistance or social protection assistance directly from their mobile phone from wherever they were. So they could dial a short code number and enter certain details which the government required, and then they were able to vet those information and basically make a list of all those who qualified. And then we gave government the access to be able to process the funds directly into the mobile wallets. And this was done, from the time the processing happened to when the beneficiaries actually received the funds directly in the mobile wallet, took less than a minute to send money to about 300,000 people across the country. So we have built a very effective channel. We work in close collaboration with government. One of the things, as the business we realize is in small market economies, the number of customers we have is very small. And the sooner the population is able to recover from disasters, the sooner we can recover as a business. So we realize that the strength of our customers is also our strength. And if we can support them recover quickly, then we are also able to recover as a business and continue to do business. The other aspect that, John, you mentioned is people, the Fijian diaspora living abroad. From 94 countries around the world, people are able to send money directly to the beneficiary mobiles in less than 10 seconds if they complete the pre-registration ones. So they could be anywhere in Fiji. Pre-COVID, we used to get about $2 million worth of international money transfers directly into the wallet. This month, we are on track to receive $32 million worth of Fijian dollars worth of transaction. That's over 1,500% growth. And what it during the pandemic in lockdown, it actually provided a lifeline to many Fijians and basically complemented government efforts of providing social protection through cash assistance. And the other aspect that I wanted to cover, because a lot of the donor agencies provide this kind of funding, They need to ensure there is complete transparency and accountability, and when you process payments electronically, you create a digital trail, and if they ever wanted to audit as to how much went to the beneficiaries, they were able to see it, and if they were to give a second or third tranche of payment, it provided complete accountability and transparency for government to make a case. I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Shailendra. Again, an incredible story of a rapid response to COVID with phenomenal numbers involved, and with a system which, one of the most interesting things for me is it allows registration through the app as well as the receipt of money, obviously in a very short space of time to a very large number of people. And interesting to hear also how private sector partnerships, private-public partnerships have, of course, benefits in the long term for the private sector, but of course phenomenal impact for the public sector in these times of crisis. So thank you, Shailendra. We'll be back to both Rodura and Shailendra a little bit later. Now, one of the challenges, of course, with social protection is it needs, if it's going to be effective, it needs to be multi-sectoral, and it needs to involve multiple stakeholders. And one of the critical success factors, therefore, for a country is how it manages to bring together those different stakeholders, from central government to local government, private sector partners, communities, civil society organizations. Pak Maliki, that's probably your daily job, is to, in the Ministry of Planning, is to coordinate across ministries at least, bringing stakeholders around a common goal. How have you confronted this challenge, aligning the interests and actions of so many different players?
Thank you, John. I think the words of confronted is a bit too strong for me. But I guess we believe that as in any other countries, that we actually gathered by the same common interest and also goals to respond to the pandemic of it. So during the pandemic of it, both the government and also the non-government have quite significantly increasing contributions to the response to the pandemic. The participations of the non-government now is quite huge. Also including the people organization of the people with disability. That's the innovations keep going from the organizations. So as what you mentioned, that it's right that we have central government, local government, community, private companies, as well as the religious as also non-religious based philanthropic that support not only actually for the poor and also non-poor, but we also have like new poor that coming from the middle income households. So with the various programs that we can coordinate with all of the stakeholders, it consists of quite a lot of programs, such as like cash transfers, direct cash transfers, food vouchers, internet vouchers, electricity subsidies, skill development, entrepreneurships, as well as the what's so-called insurance premium holiday for our social insurance. So these various programs actually cover most of the population, almost like 60% of the poorest of the population. So it means 40 million of the households of Indonesia. So your question is that how actually the government position on this, but specifically maybe what is actually our office, our planning office have a roles on how we can coordinate between all of the stakeholders. Because we are also as like a clearinghouse, we involve all the parties to build like a stronger recovery. So as a planning agency, we propose and as well as the design, the coordination mechanisms, the programs, as well as how to recommend the implementations in the fields, such as at the community level. So this is actually quite challenging steps. So at least when we did that, we identify like two key important parts. One is data, as Rodera also mentions, and then the second one is institutional arrangements that we can coordinate with, at programs implementations at the community level. So this is actually a key. To some extent it works because we have some coordination mechanisms, but again, we have some room for improvement, especially for data. So learning from the experience from this pandemic COVID, then we built social protection reform that will be regulated as like a presidential decree. That one of the strategy is actually we are trying to build the adaptive social protection. And the key point of the adaptive social protection is that we need to have like more integrated data. And especially in our office, we also coordinate for one Indonesian data. So we need to have like all the data synchronized and also be consistent. So then we are trying to build a socioeconomic registry. And good thing is that Ministry of Finance also is coordinate with us, and also the Central Statistical Bureau is coordinate with us. So then we are going to realize this socioeconomic registry incoming soon. So we will have data by the end of this year, and then we are trying to build the interoperability. So by this data, we can have like all of the features of the adaptive social protection. We can adjust the target based on the vulnerability, as well as how big actually the shocks that we are going to be affected, and then the benefit of the programs, and then how we can quickly also identify the targets, the right targets, because we have like centralized data, as well as how we can update the conditions of the populations in the current time. And the good thing about this data is that we have the data of the vulnerability of the area as well, both for the natural disaster and climate change. I think I stop there.
Excellent, thanks so much. And again, what a scale, 60% of the population covered by collectively by various social protection instruments. Thanks for talking about the reform, Maliki, and in particular, how in the move to make your social protection systems more adaptive, data and data consistency is absolutely critical. And I like your vision for having a socioeconomic registry which allows you then to make better decisions, to adjust targeting, and presumably also to adjust transfer levels as the socioeconomic status of those needy people changes over time. So thank you for that. We come to the best part of this panel session, which is your questions to the panel. So now is the time to use your apps and ask those questions. If you wish to come down to the mic, you can. I would only very respectfully ask that you don't make statements or talk for too long about how social protection works in your country. That's not because we're not interested, but we are trying to manage time. But what we're really interested in is your questions to our panel of experts today. Let me start with one that came in earlier in the session, and it's about making sure that our social protection systems are designed to support women through the life cycle, how we make our social protection systems more gender sensitive. Rodora, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. How has the Philippines confronted this challenge, particularly in your conditional transfers?
Cash transfer, yeah. For our conditional cash transfer program, we have that component of the family should be attending family development sessions. So these sessions are actually, the sessions cover actually several topics to raise their awareness regarding a lot of social issues and rights-based and understanding rights-based approaches to development. So one of the sessions that being implemented or being developed or implemented is the gender and development sessions with the mothers, not only with the mothers, but also with the male members of the household. So it's a regular session conducted by our staff at the local level, at the community-based level, to the Pantawid Pamilya beneficiaries or our conditional cash transfer beneficiaries. And I think there's an impact evaluation study that showed that there's an increased sense of empowerment among our women beneficiaries because of the of their attendance to these sessions. So I think that's one way we can actually replicate in other existing social protection systems.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to pick up that question?
Yeah, and we also offered our M-Pesa platform to Save the Children organization, who actually have a mandate to try and provide assistance to vulnerable communities, particularly women and children. Through our M-Pesa platform, they did the groundwork in terms of surveys and recorded the vulnerable in the community in terms of who needed assistance. And 39,000 families were assisted during the pandemic with cash assistance directly on their mobile phone. And if we take it as 3 members per family, that's about 120,000 individuals that were assisted directly through this. So whilst we ourselves do not provide the policy in terms of who gets, the channel is open to anyone who works with women and children or vulnerable communities to be able to access our platform and deliver services directly to the people.
Good, excellent. The data available, helping civil society is an excellent point. Maliki, on gender sensitivity, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, actually, for the gender sensitivity, I mean, in programs-wise, it's already mainstreaming, and I guess the line ministers already comply with that. But the problem is actually the accessibility as well as the coverage, because our population is quite huge, as well as if there is some shocks, says like the natural shocks, as well as this kind of pandemic. I think the harassment, sexual harassment, as well as the household harassment is still kind of persist. But then this says like the coverage as well as the accessibility is still quite limited, I think. So this is why not only like the government have to, I mean, the government alone is not enough. So then I guess the role of the civil society can be very important in this part.
Thank you. Here's an excellent question in from the audience. It's a hard one, I would say. When we talk about social protection, how do you ensure valuable engagement with all vulnerable cohorts, but in particular, transient or homeless members of communities? So how do we ensure that our social protection systems can reach homeless members of our communities or transient members of our communities?
Okay, I think I'll share the Philippine experience, but that's the first actually challenge that we had in 2011, because the National Household Targeting System was, the coverage was of course those who are living in a household living in a house, a physical house. And there was a demand or we received a series of complaints regarding what about those street families who are more vulnerable than those who have their own homes. So that's when we started developing what we call the modified conditional cash transfer program to cover street families. So it has a very tedious process. We have to, of course, look for them, register them to the program, and then provide cash grants so that they can temporarily rent houses, and until such time that they can be able to pay on their own. So there were a series of interventions provided to them, and I think most of them now are part of the regular conditional cash transfer program.
Excellent. Maliki, have you confronted this problem of transient or homeless populations in Indonesia?
Yeah, actually in our medium-term development plan, we targeted that we have referral systems in, says like the village level. So we call it in Indonesia as LRT and Puskesmas. That is like the referral system at the village level that enable actually all of these homeless people can be accessible by the programs of the social protections. Yeah. this way, actually, the facilitators play an important role on this one. So we, as a planning agency, make the pilot project for several cities and also the villages. And now it's being in charge with the Ministry of Social Affairs. And we actually really hope that to make it nationwide, have to be implemented by not only the Ministry of Social Affairs, but also Ministry of the Villages. So I guess this system is quite, have good and strong accessibility for this homeless and also transient populations. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. When we're responding to disaster events, so the typhoon hits, the economic shock comes, how do you as governments in particular optimize support to the targeted populations, ensuring that there's no overlap or minimal overlap between line ministers, NGOs and others responding? This is a perennial problem and one that we've not managed to solve very easily, but some governments nonetheless have coordination mechanisms which are quite strong. So how do you avoid overlap in the response between all of these actors who are on the ground, between civil society across the spectrum to government?
If I may, in Fiji's case, there's a meeting that regularly happens with what the organization is known as the Pacific Regional Cash Working Group. What it does is brings together a lot of these civil societies that work on ground with communities, vulnerable communities, and have their own set of database of who is affected where. And this committee is also chaired by the Permanent Secretary for Ministry of Social Welfare. And a lot of these data is actually provided back to the ministry to validate and add as part of their database of vulnerable communities. And they have unique IDs issued by the Ministry of Social Welfare to make sure that when beneficiaries receive this sort of cash assistance, there is no duplication. One of the other things that I wanted to highlight here is particularly with the mobile wallet type of service, because we have already pre-registered the SIMs. When people go and register for social protection through social welfare agencies like government agencies, there is a revalidation of the information provided there versus what we already have in our database. And what we have found is there is minimal level of duplication, because you are able to filter out multiple application by the same. But having said that, it is also a much humane and dignified way of providing assistance, because generally after a natural disaster, particularly flood and cyclone, when people take food rations, etc., they normally distribute to the people who are closest in terms of access by road. And a lot of people who are in the interior and remote are normally excluded because there is no access. When you are able to provide cash assistance through mobile wallet, provided, of course, the technology works, and we have a team that actually is very quick in restoration, then without discriminating, you are able to provide assistance to whoever, wherever, because technology doesn't really discriminate against anybody. And that way, there is a more fair distribution to anyone and everyone that is affected in a fair and transparent manner.
Thanks. I mean, I think in there's a vision somewhere that technology could be an enabler for avoiding overlap. In Bangladesh, in the refugee program, blockchain is helping us all to enter our transfers into the system, and the system then enables you with a unique beneficiary identification to avoid overlap. So technology probably in the future is going to be much more helpful here. But of course, there's no substitute for strong government coordination. Would any of our government partners like to speak on this particular topic?
For DSWD, from the ministry I came from, I think we're in a good position because we're leading the social protection cluster and at the same time the response cluster. So it already provides the opportunity for us to be able to engage as many stakeholders as we can who's doing the same work as in humanitarian response. A case in point during Typhoon Haiyan. I think it was very easy for the department to to finalize agreements on how do we do the transfers. So I think that's one. And right now, we're actively actually promoting, even if it's quite outdated, we're still actually promoting and advocating for the use of our database as a sort of, for planning and programming purposes. And we have existing memorandum of agreements with several partner organizations, development partner organizations, and non-government organizations to deliver the programs and services.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Thank you for coming down to the microphone. Please, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you all for speaking to us today. We know that social protection is an effective way to reduce poverty prior to a crisis and after the crisis, but it can be expensive. And so how can we make adaptive social protection financially sustainable, particularly in low and medium income countries? Thank you.
Outstanding question, thank you. It's expensive. How do we make it more sustainable in terms of its funding?
If I may, one of the things that we know, particularly if people are geographically dispersed, one of the major challenges is the distribution cost and access. And I think technology is the medium that can actually bring about greater cost effectiveness of taking these services to the people. But in terms of financial sustainability, whilst initial funding may be provided by donor agencies, at some point the program needs to become self-sustainable. Otherwise, it's just not going to continue forever. And one of the things that we are looking at now is beyond this cash assistance is proactive introduction of proactive products and services. And we are working in partnership with UNCDF for a program called Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Program, where what we're doing is working in partnership with insurance companies, with UNCDF, and also a mobile distribution channel like us, where people can subscribe to insurance policies, bundled insurance policies like crop insurance or immediate aftermath of a disaster in what we call parametric insurance. So if there is a rainfall of a certain millimeters, then it automatically triggers a payment to the customers. If it is a wind speed of certain and you know the crops will be destroyed, then it automatically triggers a payment. And how this is becoming sustainable is instead of paying large sums of money to beneficiaries after the event, government is sort of subsidizing the cost of the premiums, and over a period of time, once people realize the benefits of these programs, hopefully they are able to subscribe for themselves and prepare in advance so that if something like this happens, they are able to get benefits, and that it does not also blow a major hole in the government budget, because that is not a sustainable model. So, and also insurance in Fiji is very much limited to urban and peri-urban areas, because the cost of taking insurance services to rural and remote areas is very high in terms of premium costs and claims processing. But when you bring in technology, you are able to really bring down the cost. So if somebody were to come from a very rural remote island, they take 3 boat rides before they can come and pay a premium of $25. But if you are able to allow them to pay for the $25 premium from wherever they may be, then you bring a whole lot of people in the ecosystem where once a non-viable product becomes really viable, and it opens up more opportunities for the insurance as well as greater protection for the people.
Thanks, Shailendra. Rodora, did you want to?
Yeah, I would just like to share that maybe at the onset it would seem very expensive, but in the Philippine experience, I think the the implementation of the conditional cash transfer program for the last 8 years has helped the country manage the poverty situation in the Philippines, as shown by the recent poverty estimates that was released a few months ago after the COVID-19. We were actually expecting that a higher poverty incidence will be the result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But though it's higher than the pre-pandemic times, it's still, the increase was relatively low compared before. And the Philippine Institute of Development Studies did simulations that if we weren't able to develop CCT or implemented conditional cash transfer program prior to the pandemic or during the pandemic, the number of poor households would have gone up to 5 million instead of 2 million. So that's actually a real cost if we look at the efficiency and effectiveness of existing social protection programs. And then I think the best way to actually manage the cost is to have it still targeted. The target households should still be the near poor and the poor households, because they are still the most vulnerable to risk and other to disaster risk and climate risk. So that's all.
Thanks, great. And better targeting, critical. The notion that adaptive social protection builds resilience when the disaster comes, fewer transfers are needed, or perhaps a lower depth of transfer, and the recovery is quicker. All these things point to adaptive social protection being a really good investment. I need to apologize. We need to close the Q&A session now. Thank you for your questions, and I really apologize that we couldn't get to them all. What I can commit to you, though, is your questions will not be lost. We will use them to, 1, to learn from, 2, to orient our work, and 3, to hopefully plan a next event around social protection. They haven't been asked, therefore, in vain. Panelists, you have brought to us some really wonderful insights and examples which have inspired us around how you're dealing with the challenges, and I thank you in particular for being so open about the challenges and how you're confronting them. Let me come back to each of you, though, for some final words. Something perhaps that a reflection you've had during the session, something that you wanted to say earlier but didn't have the opportunity. Let me maybe start with Rodora, if I may. You're just closest to me, you.
Okay, I think building adaptive social protection system is not just about providing one-time cash transfer. We should be able to tap the preventive and promotive functions of social protection system, meaning develop a host of interventions that would actually address specific shocks and stressors of individuals. So we could develop affordable social insurance for our informal sector, social safety nets, subsidies. There are several programs already available that I think we could scale up. And of course, on top of that, we should be also tapping the promotive function of social protection in terms of developing sustainable livelihoods and diversification of livelihoods, especially among our fisher folks and farmers, who are the most vulnerable one of the most vulnerable sectors. So I think we should be able. Social protection is a host of programs and interventions, so that we would be able to really move from just from response to really protection. I think I forgot to mention that anticipatory action also is a very, very, I think, critical element if we want really to move towards adapting an adaptive social protection system.
Excellent, thank you. Jalendra?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to have data. Natural disasters and disasters in general have been happening over a period of time. And in the Pacific Islands, we are quite vulnerable, and there is regular occurrence of floods and cyclones. So we have a whole host of historical data. If we can overlay that data over some sort of a system or modeling, we could have a predictive sort of model which can identify in advance that likelihood of something happening. And if we are able to do that, then we can basically design adaptive social protection programs based on expected event that might occur. So I think the technology provides us one of those tools to be able to collect the data, analyze that, do data analytics and predictive modeling to be able to better get ready before the incident, what to do during the incident or the event, and post-disaster, what are the kind of things that we need to have in place. Private-public partnership is very important. We need to collaborate. We need to leverage of the strengths of the different players, government, private sector, to be able to not replicate and waste resources, but use the resources at our disposal in the most effective and efficient way. One of the things that we have been able to do, and in one of the sessions, somebody was saying that the lack of in-house or in-country capacity. We have been fortunate that in Fiji, we are a 100% locally owned company, and the solution has been designed in-house by Vodafone. And because of that, we have been able to tweak and tailor solutions as the need arises to apply to local situations. So it gives us the flexibility in terms of making changes and scalability in what we do. So if we are able to build in-house capability, then I think we are able to react or basically plan in advance. And also when we need to deliver assistance to the people and the vulnerable people, we can do it much quicker, because after a disaster, the time spent is very, very short when the immediacy of the assistance need to be is quite critical. And having done this over a number of years, we have now got in place specific templates to the level that the 160 character text message that goes to the beneficiary or the affected people is already pre-crafted and approved, so we don't run around getting approvals from people when the disaster strikes. So these are some very, very fundamental things that we do as advanced planning to be proactive.
Thanks, Shailendra. Maliki.
Yes, I guess there's never been expensive for social protection if it is adaptable. So if we also follow some of the keys of the adaptive social protections, I guess it is affordable. Yeah. Because I think one of the keys, we need to have accurate data, data that can cover almost the populations and also accurate, updated. Yeah. So then we can see how actually the accuracy of the programs. And this one can save a lot of money. And then better prepare, of course. So then we can better prepare all of the populations, especially for those who actually are quite vulnerable, in the vulnerable place, not only for the natural shocks, but also for the climate change. If we better prepare them in terms of financing, in terms of skills, I guess they can also prepare for some future shocks. And then I agree with Shailendra that technology is also a key, because with technology, we can deliver the benefits in instant way, especially for, for those in the quite difficult places. Yeah. So then from that, I guess, coming to the better infrastructures. So we need to invest infrastructures that can actually resilience to the shocks. So this way, I guess, we invest, then it will be have more better accessibility later on. And then, of course, we also need to integrate or convergence, meaning that not only the government, but also the non-government actors, including the organization with the people of with disability here. Even, I guess, for the government actors, we also need to coordinate. It's not only Minister of Social Affairs, but the whole ministers, line ministers, have to taking care of these problems. So I guess the implementation of the ASP is quite important. And this one is quite consistent and also strongly support our SDGs goals 1.3, as well also the global partnerships for the universal social protection, USP 2030. So then we are going to have like the full population coverage who are actually impacted by the natural, by the shocks later on, including women, girls, senior citizens, children, people with disability, with adequate benefit and services. That's all.
Thanks. I think what's interesting is the notion that while our social protection systems can be improved and while they need to be more preventive, and while technology can offer us efficiencies that perhaps we haven't exploited up to now, what I'm hearing is a resounding message from governments that this is a worthwhile investment to make. It's a worthwhile investment because it gives a return which governments recognize. And I think that's a really, really important thing to come out of today's session. Allow me to try to draw us to a close. We live in a world where disasters are growing and where our resources seemingly are more and more scarce, less and less available for us. And within that context, social protection systems are an extremely powerful mechanism for us to reach the most vulnerable and help them to weather the worst impacts of successive shocks. The successive shocks which we're seeing across the region are impacting particularly the poor. We recognize, and we've talked about it today, how much work still needs to be done. Our social protection systems need to be better targeted. They need to be more inclusive. They need to be more agile. We need better data to make decisions. They need to be more cost effective. They need to be more preventive. Our social protection systems need to cater for groups with special needs, like the elderly, people with disabilities, and as per the question today, the transient and the homeless need to be included. And for all of that to happen, we need more substantive investment from governments in social protection systems, investments that are cost efficient, and investments, as per the question from over here, which can be sustained over time. So, a number of challenges to confront. However, what's coming through is a recognition that social protection systems offer us an immense opportunity. They offer us an opportunity to invest in a nationally owned solution and to invest in empowering even the most vulnerable people to take more control over their own lives, to have the resources to act and to make their own decisions. Another theme that's come through is that no one can do this alone, and I see this theme coming across this whole conference. No one can do this alone. Partnerships are fundamental. Partnerships across government ministries, partnerships with the private sector, partnerships with an array of stakeholders and civil society. My organization, the World Food Programme, is working with governments across the region to enhance and make more effective social protection systems. And I today pledge our tireless support to any government that wishes to make their social protection systems more adaptive. But together we can be a really strong force for the poor and vulnerable. So, colleagues and friends from the audience, I really hope today that our panelists have inspired you as much as they've inspired me. And I hope, above all, that you go away with a renewed energy and a sense that although adaptive social protection is complex, there are excellent examples here today and excellent examples out there in the region which can inspire us. There are also, clear from today's panel, examples of governments, civil society, private sector, different stakeholders working together already across the region to make it happen. And finally, let me say that if there was any time that we had to get this right, it is now. Now when an economic shock, a shock of an immense magnitude, a food security crisis which is almost unprecedented, is affecting our region and indeed affecting the globe. So if there's any time to get this right, it's right now. Let's therefore go back to our respective countries with a new resolve, a resolve to deliver better solutions for the millions of people that depend on us. Let's go back and deliver adaptive social protection. My name is John Ayliff. I'm the Regional Director of the World Food Programme for Asia and the Pacific. It's been my great honour to be the moderator of this session, but my real thanks goes to our expert panelists, and I would ask you to give them a round of applause. But thank you to all of you.